Please subscribe to the channel to help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. I had always thought that a hotel's job was simple. Offer a room, a bed, and a safe place for weary travelers. But Jack had always insisted that our hotel was different. The Hotel of Time, as he called it, wasn't like any other place I'd worked before. And I've worked in some strange spots. It was my first day and the place was quiet, almost too quiet. The air smelled faintly of old wood and something I couldn't quite place, like dust mixed with something sharper, like the smell of an old book that hasn't been opened in decades. It was the kind of scent that made you think something was hidden in the shadows, something that had been waiting for years to be unearthed. Jack greeted me at the front desk, his wrinkled face breaking into a warm, almost too friendly smile. His dark eyes, however, had the sharpness of someone who had seen things. Things I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Clara, welcome to the Hotel of Time," he said, his voice raspy but reassuring. "I'm sure you've heard rumors. You'll soon learn the rules. But remember, it's not just a job, it's a responsibility. The hotel is special." I couldn't hide my skepticism. I had heard all the stories, the old haunted hotel routine. But Jack was different. He didn't look like a man who would indulge in folklore. There was something almost resigned in the way he spoke. "I've heard a little. Nothing I can't handle," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Jack's smile faded just a bit, as if weighing my response. "I'm glad you think so. But let's get you settled in first, and then I'll show you the ropes." He led me through the lobby, which had an air of faded grandeur. The old wooden floors creaked under our feet as we passed by the walls adorned with vintage portraits of long-dead guests. Some of the faces looked too lifelike, almost too aware of my presence as I walked past. I tried to shake off the unease, creeping up my spine. "The rules are simple," Jack continued, as we moved deeper into the hotel. "First, you need to know about room 13. He paused, glancing at me to make sure I was listening. "That room is off-limits after dark. No exceptions." I raised an eyebrow. "Room 13? Really? That's the classic, don't go in there room?" Jack's expression didn't change. "It's not a joke. Trust me. After dark, the room changes. There are things that live there. Things that don't belong to this world." His voice dropped to a whisper, though there was no one around to hear us. I couldn't help but laugh, though I quickly regretted it. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious," he replied, his gaze fixed ahead. Before I could respond, the door to the hotel swung open, and a couple walked in, looking around with the kind of curiosity that only those who weren't familiar with the hotel's reputation could have. Jack greeted them, and I stood awkwardly, watching the exchange. The couple seemed like a typical pair of tourists, eager to explore, but a little too eager when they noticed the old, mysterious vibe of the hotel. "Is it true about room 13? The woman asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Jack didn't hesitate. "It's not a place for sightseeing. I suggest you avoid it." The man smiled, clearly not taking Jack's warning seriously. "We're just curious, that's all. Maybe we'll take a look later, after we get settled." Jack's face hardened. "I advise against it. After dark, that room, it's not what you think, and the hotel has a way of taking what doesn't belong." He paused before adding, "Please, follow the rules. It's for your own safety." The couple exchanged a glance but didn't seem entirely convinced. They thanked Jack and wandered off to their rooms, clearly dismissing his warning as nothing more than a quirky part of the hotel's charm. I watched them go, feeling a strange shiver run down my spine. The air in the lobby felt colder now, even though the sun was still high in the sky. Jack turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You'll get used to the oddities here, Clara. But remember, this place can be more dangerous than it lets on. And the rules, they aren't just for show." I nodded, trying to process everything he'd said. Room 13, a place that changed after dark. And now, after that warning, I was beginning to wonder what kind of hotel I had just walked into. But I wasn't about to let myself be scared by a few creepy stories. I had a job to do, and that's all it was going to be. A job. The first few days at the Hotel of Time passed without much excitement. Most of the guests came and went, following the rules Jack had outlined. Whether out of respect or fear, I couldn't tell. I kept my distance from the ominous room 13, doing my best to stick to my duties and not overthink the strange things Jack had said. But something about this place made it impossible to stay indifferent for long. It started small at first. A door that I was sure I had locked when I left would be wide open when I returned to check on it. At first I thought maybe I had just forgotten. But it wasn't just one door. It was multiple. Every time I passed by a room, there would be a lingering coldness in the air, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. I chalked it up to the building's age, the drafty hallways. But it was hard to ignore the sense that something was wrong. And then, one evening, as I was returning to the front desk after a quick break, I saw it. The door to room 13, the one Jack had warned me about, was wide open. The hallway was dim, with only a faint light coming from the far end of the corridor. And the door, how could I put this, looked wrong. The edges of the wood seemed to shimmer, the grain twisting unnaturally in the low light. I stood frozen, for a moment, heart pounding, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe the cleaning crew had entered, maybe they forgot to close it. But no, something about the way it shimmered. It wasn't just a drafty old hotel. I took a step toward it, drawn by something I couldn't explain. Before I could get too close, I heard footsteps behind me. "Clara," Jack's voice called from the shadows of the lobby. "I see you found room 13. I spun around, startled. "Jack, I was just checking." I didn't even know what to say. What could I say? He was already moving toward me, his steps slow but purposeful. "I told you, after dark, don't get close." He glanced at the open door with a grim look on his face. It has a way of calling people, pulling them in. The hotel's, well, it has its own rules, its own ways of working. I swallowed, hard, my throat dry. "I didn't open it, Jack, I swear." He nodded, as though he expected nothing less. "I know. It's just that sometimes the hotel does things on its own. It doesn't need permission to move." His words made my skin crawl. I couldn't help but glance back at the door. For a moment, it felt like the hallway around me was closing in, the shadows creeping forward like something alive. "Come on," Jack said, his voice softer now. "Let's get you away from this place for a bit. I don't want you to get too caught up in its strange ways." I didn't resist as he led me back toward the front desk. His calm demeanor didn't match the storm of unease growing inside me. How could I explain that something felt off, that the hotel, this building, had a life of its own? As we passed by the lobby, the couple, Marcos and Laura, had just returned from a late-night walk. They seemed cheerful, almost too much so for the hour. "Everything's good, Jack," Marcos called out, giving us a thumbs up. "We just explored the whole place. It's incredible." Laura, his wife, nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, we love it here. The place has so much character. We even found a few hidden corners we didn't know existed. The haunted room, too. You weren't kidding about the weird vibes there, but we're not scared." My heart skipped a beat. I glanced at Jack, who was staring at them intently. He didn't say anything at first, but I saw his jaw tighten. "Just remember the rules," he finally said, his voice low. "Respect the boundaries the hotel sets. It has its own rhythm." "Sure, Jack, of course," Marcos said, laughing it off. "We'll be careful." As they headed off to their room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. I had seen enough to know that they were playing with something they didn't understand, something far more dangerous than they realized. But Jack didn't seem worried. "I'm telling you, Clara," Jack said, once the couple was out of earshot. "There's something about them. They don't seem like your typical guests." "What do you mean?" I asked, though a sinking feeling had already settled in my stomach. "They're too curious. They've been asking questions that go beyond what they should know." He paused, looking over at the front desk as if expecting someone else to walk in. "Sometimes the hotel pulls in people who need to know too much. It lures them in, and when they're ready, it doesn't let go." I felt a chill run down my spine, the weight of his words sinking in. I wanted to tell him that he was being paranoid, that it was just a hotel with a strange reputation, but something in the back of my mind told me I couldn't dismiss it. Not anymore. Suddenly, the lights flickered above us, just for a moment, as if the hotel itself were taking a breath. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Jack nodded. "It's starting, just wait." "Starting?" I echoed, my heart pounding in my chest. "The hotel has its own rhythm," Jack repeated. "And when it begins to wake up, strange things start to happen. Trust me, Clara. Things you won't be able to explain. Things you won't want to explain." Didn't know if it was his warning that unsettled me or the events that had been unfolding so far, but one thing was certain. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was about to come. It's strange how something can haunt you even when you're not looking at it. For days, the thought of room 13 lingered in the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. The door had been left ajar that night, shimmering in the dim light of the hallway. I knew I shouldn't go near it, but I couldn't help myself. Something about it pulled me. That's the thing about the Hotel of Time. It doesn't let you forget. The walls, the floors, the doors. They all have a memory of their own. A presence that stays with you, even when you're not around. I was sitting behind the front desk late one night when I noticed Marcos and Laura walking down the hallway again. Their footsteps echoed in the silence of the hotel, and they seemed to be looking for something. Or perhaps they were searching for someone. I felt my stomach tighten. "Clara," Jack's voice broke through my thoughts. I looked up to see him standing behind me, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the couple's movements. "I need you to keep an eye on them. They've been asking too many questions." I nodded, though I couldn't help but feel like he was overreacting. What harm could they really do? The couple seemed harmless enough, even if they were a little too eager to explore. But Jack wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on room 13. "Don't let them get too close," he muttered under his breath. I glanced toward the door, which was still a few feet away from the front desk. It looked normal from this angle, nothing out of the ordinary, but then something happened. The hallway lights flickered, and then they went out completely. For a split second, I was plunged into darkness. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath shallow. I fumbled for the light switch behind the desk, but the air felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me, and then, as if on cue, the lights flickered back on. But I didn't need to see to feel it. Room 13, it was open. The door stood wide, as if inviting someone in. The corridor was empty now, no trace of Marcos and Laura. Just the door, silently beckoning. I don't know what came over me, but I found myself standing up from behind the desk, walking toward it before I even realized what I was doing. I could feel Jack's eyes on me, his warning hanging in the air like a cloud. "Clara," he called out, his voice sharp. "Don't." But it was too late. I was standing at the threshold of room 13 before I could stop myself, my hand hovering over the brass handle. The air around me felt electric, as if the hotel itself was alive, breathing. I didn't turn back to look at Jack. I didn't even consider the consequences. Something inside me told me that if I didn't see it for myself now, I never would. I pushed the door open. The room inside was wrong. It wasn't like any hotel room I had ever seen. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper that seemed to swirl and pulse, as if they were alive, shifting just beneath the surface. The furniture was old, but not just old. It was ancient. The bed sat in the center of the room, but it didn't look like a bed meant for sleeping. It was more like an altar, a thing of twisted metal and tattered fabric. The window was dark, as if it didn't reflect the outside world. But instead, something else. Something other. I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath me. The air was thick with dust and something else. Something metallic, like the taste of blood in the back of my throat. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't pull myself away. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my heart racing. But when I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me. But before I could react, I heard a voice. It was soft at first, like a whisper that just brushed against the edge of my mind. "Help me." I froze. It wasn't my imagination. The voice came again, clearer this time, almost desperate. Help me, please. I glanced around, my pulse thundering in my ears. There was no one else in the room, nothing to explain the voice. But it wasn't just any voice. It was familiar, and I realized with a jolt that it sounded like Marcos. I reached out toward the source of the voice, my hands shaking. The room seemed to stretch and warp, the walls closing in on me. The floor beneath my feet felt like it was shifting, like the room was twisting itself around me. I had to get out. With all my strength, I yanked at the door again, but this time it swung open easily. I stumbled backward into the hallway, gasping for air as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Jack was standing right outside, his face pale, his eyes locked onto mine, and there was something dark in them now, something that hadn't been there before. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. I swallowed hard, trying to calm my breathing. I don't know. It was like the room was alive. I heard. "You shouldn't have gone in." Jack cut me off, his voice strained. "It's not just a room, Clara. It's a prison. For them." "Who?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Who's trapped?" "In there?" Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced down the hallway, as if sensing something that wasn't quite right. "I'll tell you later," he said, his voice grimmer than I had ever heard it. "But for now, we need to find Marcos and Laura. I think they're all ready." Before he could finish, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, coming from room 13. I didn't have to look to know what it meant. Marcos and Laura were inside. I didn't have time to question Jack's cryptic words. The sound of footsteps coming from room 13 echoed in the corridor, and my heart skipped a beat. They couldn't have. Marcos and Laura couldn't have gone in there, not after all the warnings. They'd been told, more than once, to stay away, and yet, here we were, with them walking straight into the lion's den. Jack moved swiftly, his face tight with a tension I hadn't seen before. He looked at me, his eyes hard and focused. "Stay close," he said. "We're going in." I barely had time to react before he was already heading toward room 13, his hand gripping the brass handle. For a moment I hesitated, my mind spinning with what I had seen and heard inside that room. I still couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a strange place. It was a doorway, an entrance to something. Darker, I followed Jack, my feet feeling like lead as I approached the threshold of room 13 again. The door creaked open with an unnatural slowness, as if the hotel itself was reluctant to reveal its secrets. The air inside was thick, oppressive, as if it were pressing down on me, trying to suffocate me. Jack stepped inside without a second thought, his back straight, his movements methodical. He knew this place, knew what it could do. But me? I was just trying to survive it. I took a deep breath and stepped over the threshold, immediately feeling the temperature drop. The familiar smells of the hotel, the faint scent of dust and old wood, were replaced by something colder, something metallic. It reminded me of the taste I had in my mouth the moment I walked into the room. Blood. "Jack, where are they?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. The silence in the room was suffocating. Jack didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the space, darting from one corner to another, his hand gripping a flashlight that cast sharp beams of light against the swirling, faded wallpaper. But he didn't look at the walls. His gaze was fixed on the far end of the room where the bed sat, still, unmoving, like an altar of twisted metal. "Over there," Jack said, pointing toward the far corner of the room. I squinted through the dim light, and that's when I saw them, Marcos and Laura, standing completely still, their backs to us. At first, I thought they were just frozen in some kind of shock. But then I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. Their movements were too stiff, their bodies too rigid. They weren't just standing, they were paralyzed. Their eyes, though, they weren't looking ahead, as one might expect. No, their eyes were wide open, staring at the walls in an almost unnatural way, as if they were trapped in a trance. I took a step toward them, but Jack grabbed my arm, his grip firm, pulling me back. "No," he said, his voice sharp. "Don't get too close." I turned to look at him, but he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were locked on the couple, his expression dark and grim. They're in it now. They've been pulled in. I didn't understand what he meant. Pulled in? By what? I tried to shake the fog from my mind, but it was as if everything in this room, this entire hotel, was working against me, pushing me further from the answers I needed. Jack, what's happening to them? I demanded, my voice rising in panic. Why aren't they moving? They're caught in the time loop, Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's the hotel's doing. It traps people in moments from the past, pulls them into these reflections. They'll be stuck here, reliving their worst fears over and over unless we get them out. I glanced back at Marcos and Laura, my chest tightening. They didn't even seem like themselves anymore. They were gone, swallowed up by whatever this place had done to them. I need to get them out, I said, my words sounding hollow in my own ears. Don't, Jack warned, pulling me back once more. This place doesn't work like that. The hotel. Once it has someone, it doesn't let them go easily. I looked at him, confused. What do you mean? The only way to get them out, Jack said slowly, his eyes narrowing in thought, is to go deeper. We need to find the source. We need to find the heart of what's keeping them trapped here. Are you crazy? I whispered. You want us to go deeper into this place? Jack's eyes softened for a moment, as if the weight of his words was beginning to settle in. He shook his head. I don't want to, Clara. But I don't think we have a choice. If we leave them here, they'll be lost forever. And worse, the hotel will claim us too. It always does. We need to find a way to break the cycle. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine, the dread settling deeper into my bones. The very thought of being trapped in this twisted place, stuck in time, sent a surge of terror through me. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what Jack was suggesting, but I didn't have a choice. We couldn't leave them like this. They were our responsibility now, and I had to see this through. I moved toward Marcos and Laura, my breath quickening with each step. The air grew heavier as I approached them, the walls almost pressing in, as though the hotel itself was warning me to turn back. But I didn't. As I reached for Laura's arm, her eyes snapped to mine, wide and unblinking. She didn't speak, but there was something in her gaze, a pleading, desperate sort of look. Clara, Jack said quietly, they're not really here. This is an echo. You can't just pull them out like that. We need to understand what this room is, why it's doing this. But it was too late. I felt a sharp tug in my chest, as though something was pulling me into the room, into the past, and for a split second I lost my footing, and then everything shifted. The air became thick and unbearable, as if the entire room was collapsing in on me. I couldn't breathe. The walls twisted, and the floor beneath me seemed to move like a wave. I could feel myself being pulled backward, dragged into the very heart of room 13. No! I screamed, my voice muffled by the roar of the hotel. But it wasn't just room 13 that was changing. It was everything. I don't know how long I was falling. It felt like minutes, or maybe hours. The sensation of being pulled, dragged deeper into the twisting, pulsating heart of the hotel was beyond anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical, it was psychic. Every cell in my body screamed to escape, but something in the hotel was relentless, suffocating my will to fight. When I finally hit the ground, hard, everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I came to, the world around me was a blur of shifting shadows and cold, damp air. I could barely make sense of where I was. I was lying on something soft, but the room felt wrong. It felt alive, breathing. I pushed myself up with a groan, blinking as my surroundings slowly took shape. I was back in room 13. But this wasn't the same room from before. The bed was gone, and in its place stood a cracked mirror that reflected nothing but blackness. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing scorched marks on the walls. The air was thick with the stench of decay and something metallic. Blood. Clara. Jack's voice pierced through the fog of confusion, and I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his face pale, eyes wide with concern. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his clothes wrinkled and torn. But there was no time for questions. "We're running out of time," Jack said, his voice low but urgent. "The hotel is starting to shift again. It won't let us leave until we fix this." I didn't understand, but I knew the urgency in his voice was real. There was no escaping this place. Not now, not with Marcos and Laura still lost somewhere inside. "I don't know if we can fix it," I muttered, my throat dry, my words barely a whisper. "We tried. We went in. We saw—" "I know," Jack cut me off, stepping into the room and placing a hand on my shoulder. "But we've been going about this all wrong. We've been trying to fight the hotel, to make sense of it. But that's not how it works. This place is beyond anything we understand. It's older than time itself, Clara, and it's not going to stop until it has what it wants." "What does it want?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Jack didn't answer right away. He just looked around the room as if searching for something. I could feel the weight of his silence, the deep knowledge he carried that was just out of reach. He knew what this place was capable of, but he was afraid to tell me. I could see it in his eyes. "Whatever it is, it's tied to room 13, he said finally, his voice tight. "We've been trying to close the door to seal it, but there's something deeper, something darker at the heart of this place. The hotel is alive, Clara. It feeds off time itself, bending it, distorting it, and it wants us. All of us." I felt the bile rise in my throat. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't just about a room or a set of strange phenomena. The hotel was the monster. It had been feeding on us all along, feeding on time, on our lives. "We have to get out of here," I said, more to myself than to Jack, though I knew the words were futile. The door, which I had assumed would lead back to the hallway, was still locked shut, and the air around us was thick with the palpable weight of the hotel's power. Jack's face twisted into a grimace. "That's the problem. We can't leave. The moment we try, the hotel pulls us back, makes us part of it. We've all been trapped here since the beginning. Every step we've taken, every move we've made, it's been leading us deeper into its grasp." I didn't want to believe him, but deep down, I knew he was right. The very fabric of the hotel was shifting around us, warping time and reality. No matter how many times we tried to leave, no matter how hard we fought to break free, the hotel always pulled us back in, and now it was demanding more. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Jack exhaled slowly, as though the weight of the decision had been eating at him for days. He turned toward me, his eyes intense, searching my face for something I couldn't name. "We finish it. We find the heart of this place. We break it." Breath caught in my chest, the heart of the hotel, the source of its power. The thought of facing whatever lay at the center of this nightmare sent a chill through me. But it was clear. There was no other choice. If we didn't act now, if we didn't stop this hotel from taking everything, then we were already lost. "Where do we start?" I asked, my voice steady now, even though fear still gnawed at me. Jack looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the cracked mirror. "We start here," he said quietly. "We've been looking at this all wrong. Room 13 isn't just a room. It's a door to the heart of the hotel. And once we open it, we'll have to face whatever's on the other side." I nodded, trying to push aside the fear crawling up my spine. There was no time to second guess. I had to trust Jack, even if it meant facing the unknown. I took a step toward the mirror, and as I did, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, the air thickening with a strange, oppressive force. The mirror pulsed, the reflection warping and distorting like liquid. "We have to break it," Jack said, his voice low. "Once we do, it'll show us what we need to see." I reached out a hand, trembling, and before I could stop myself, I pressed my palm to the cold surface of the mirror. The glass beneath my hand felt soft, as though it were made of clay, not glass. There was a low hum in the room, and then, crack. The mirror shattered. But it wasn't just glass that fell to the ground. The entire room seemed to collapse inward, like a tunnel being opened up. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought we had made a terrible mistake. But then, through the shards of broken mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Was the hotel. The real heart of it. and it was calling us. The moment the mirror shattered, time itself seemed to stand still. The air around us crackled, thick with the energy of the hotel's ancient pulse. I tried to steady myself, but the ground beneath my feet felt unstable, shifting as if the hotel were alive and breathing. For a moment, the world felt impossibly still. The walls were no longer simply walls. They seemed to ripple like water, their surface undulating in strange patterns, as though they were trying to speak. And in the midst of it, a voice, low, guttural, and ancient, whispered from the darkness, "You shouldn't have come." It was the same voice I'd heard in my nightmares, the voice that had haunted me since I first stepped foot inside this cursed place. And then, just as quickly as the stillness had settled in, it was broken. I stumbled forward, the ground beneath me giving way like sand, as if I was falling into another dimension. The mirror had opened a rift, a gateway to whatever lay at the center of the hotel's twisted heart. But instead of a black void, I saw light, blinding light. I shielded my eyes, my mind scrambling to make sense of the vision. And then, as the light dimmed, I saw him. A man, standing in the center of the room. He was old, his skin pale and weathered like paper, but his eyes were bright, unnaturally so. His thin lips curled into a smile, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of someone who had seen too much, someone who had lived far beyond their time. He was wearing a long, dark coat, the fabric frayed at the edges, and his hands were clasped in front of him, holding something. A small, leather-bound book. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking despite myself. The man didn't respond at first. He only watched me with those eerie, glowing eyes, as though he could see into the deepest recesses of my soul. "This place is more than just a hotel," he said, his voice soft but steady. "It is a prison for time itself." Jack stepped forward, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man didn't flinch. "I was the man who built this place," he replied. "Or rather, I was the man who made it what it is." His words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. I looked at Jack, who seemed equally confused and uneasy. "I'm the reason you're all trapped here," the man continued, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "I started the experiments. The temporal experiments. And they were a mistake. My mistake." I felt the air grow colder around me, the tension mounting. "Temporal experiments?" I whispered. "What are you talking about?" The man's smile widened, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. "You see, I wanted to see if time could be controlled, manipulated, bottled up, made eternal, and this place, this hotel, was to be my laboratory, the perfect experiment." I shuddered. So, it was true. The rumors Jack had shared, the strange happenings, the disappearing guests, the shifting corridors, all of it was tied to this man's sick obsession with time. "I didn't know the consequences," the man continued, his tone becoming bitter. "I didn't know what I was doing, how I was tearing at the fabric of reality. I didn't know that the hotel itself would become alive, feeding off time, bending it, twisting it. And now I am bound to it. Forever." I could feel the air in the room grow heavier, suffocating us as the man spoke. Every word seemed to drain the warmth from the space, replacing it with a chilling coldness. "But why?" Jack asked, his voice tight. "Why did you do this?" The man's eyes narrowed. "Because I could. Because I believed I could control it. But I was wrong. Now, I am the prisoner, and I will never be free. Not until someone else takes my place." A heavy silence fell between us. I could feel the weight of his words, the truth sinking in. We weren't just dealing with a haunted hotel, we were dealing with something far worse. The very essence of time itself was tangled up in this place, and the man who had created it was cursed to live within it, eternally. I stepped forward, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "What are we supposed to do? How do we stop this?" The man looked at me, his expression a mixture of pity and contempt. "There is no stopping it. Not anymore. The hotel has its own will now. And once you've entered, there's no leaving. Not unless... He paused, his gaze flickering toward Jack. Unless you become it. Unless you take my place. Jack's face went pale, his expression darkening. What do you mean, take your place? The man's smile was cold. You will have to merge with the hotel, become its new keeper, its new master. I froze. The thought of being trapped here forever, of becoming part of this living, breathing nightmare made my skin crawl. But then the man's eyes shifted to me, and I saw something different in his gaze. There was a flicker of something dark, something far worse than anything we had yet faced. Or, he said softly, you can choose to stay forever in the endless loop of this place, live in its twisted version of reality. I felt the weight of his words like a leaden weight in my chest. The room began to spin again, my vision blurring as I struggled to comprehend what was happening. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I realized that the stakes had just become far higher than I ever imagined. Jack looked at me, his expression hardening. We can't stay here. We can't let it win. I knew, deep down, that he was right. But the more the man spoke, the more I could feel the hotel's power, its pull, crawling under my skin. It was alive. It was always alive. And it wanted us, all of us, to join it. The man stepped back, his eyes gleaming with a dark satisfaction. Then you have made your choice. But know this, the hotel will never let you go, not once you've crossed the line. It will follow. You, always. The air around us began to warp again, the edges of the room shifting in impossible ways. And before I could even react, the spirit of the man who had created this nightmare, faded into the air, disappearing as if he had never been there at all. I could feel the weight of his words like a cold hand around my throat. The hotel would never let us go. That chilling promise, delivered in the softest of whispers, echoed in my mind long after the spirit, disappeared. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to move. The walls around us seemed to stretch, the air thickening, pressing down on us with a suffocating force. Jack was staring at the spot where the man had been, his face a mixture of disbelief and something darker, something closer to fear. But then his expression shifted, his jaw clenched, his fists tightened, and slowly, ever so slowly, he turned to face me, as though some new determination had sparked inside him. We need to stop this, Jack said, his voice low but resolute. And we need to stop it now. I swallowed hard. His words gave me a sense of urgency, but also doubt. Could we stop it? Could we really break free from the twisted grip of the hotel before it consumed us completely? What are we going to do? I asked, my voice unsteady. Jack ran a hand through his disheveled hair, pacing back and forth in front of me. He looked like a man on the edge of a breakdown, but I could see the determination in his eyes. He was planning something. There's a way, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There's always a way. I felt a chill run down my spine. The words didn't sound reassuring. They sounded more like a desperate hope, a prayer. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. How? What's the plan? Jack stopped pacing, his eyes meeting mine with a flicker of something sharp. We have to go to the heart of the hotel, the very center. That's where the power is. That's where it all started. I frowned, trying to piece together everything I'd seen and heard. The heart? But the hotel is alive. How are we supposed to even find that? Jack didn't flinch. It's not as impossible as you think. I've spent years here, Clara. Years. The hotel has a pattern. It bends time, yes, but it's also tied to certain places. There are areas of the hotel where the walls are thinner. Places where the veil between worlds is weaker. I took a step closer, my mind spinning. So, you know how to get there? Jack nodded, his gaze turning distant for a moment. I've seen it. I've felt it. There's a room, a hidden room. One that only reveals itself when the time is right. It's called the Chamber of Ages. That's where we'll find the core. The center. I felt a tremor of fear coil inside me. A hidden room. A room that only revealed itself when the time was right. That didn't sound like something we could just walk into. Jack seemed to read the doubt on my face. I know it sounds impossible, but this hotel is inconsistent. It shifts, yes, but it's also bound by certain rules. The core of this place can't hide forever. We just have to be ready when it shows itself. I closed my eyes, trying to calm the storm in my chest. The hotel had been bending time, manipulating our every move, trapping us in endless loops, and now we were supposed to find some hidden room to fix it. But Jack was right. We didn't have another option. There was no escape unless we took the risk. So, how do we find it? I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Jack exhaled, his eyes narrowing in concentration. There's a key that will unlock the Chamber of Ages. We have to find it. Once we do, the room will reveal itself. And then, we'll have to make the choice to destroy the core of the hotel. I felt my stomach twist. And if we don't? Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave me a look, one that said it all. The kind of look that cut through all the bravado and told me exactly what I needed to hear. There would be no coming back. Then we'll be trapped here forever, Jack said finally, his voice tight. I swallowed, the reality of it hitting me. Like a punch to the gut. We had to succeed. We didn't have a choice. We can do this, I said, more to myself than to him. I had to believe it. I had to. Jack met my gaze, his expression softening, but only slightly. We can. But it's going to be dangerous. We'll be fighting against the hotel itself. Every step we take will make it more desperate to stop us. I nodded. We'd already come this far. We couldn't turn back now. Not after everything we'd seen. Not after everything that had happened to us. Marcos and Laura weren't just casualties of some freak accident. They were victims of the hotel's power, just like us. We owed it to them, to ourselves, to finish this. Jack's eyes glinted with determination. We start by finding the key. The key is the only thing that will lead us to the Chamber of Ages. And the key is hidden somewhere in this hotel. I frowned, feeling the weight of his words. Somewhere? Where exactly? Jack paused, his gaze sweeping over the room as if he could sense where the key was. It's in the library. The hotel's heart is tied to that place. It's the center of knowledge here, the heart of all its secrets. I felt a flicker of hope. The library. Of course. It made sense. The hotel had to have a place where it stored its knowledge, its history. If we were going to stop it, the answers would be there. How do we get there? I asked, glancing around the room that seemed to be shifting and warping at the edges, as though trying to trap us in some sort of pocket dimension. Jack moved toward the door, his expression hardening. We'll have to move fast. The hotel will try to keep us from getting there. But we've got to make it to the library before it changes again. The longer we wait, the more unpredictable it gets. I followed him to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. I wasn't sure what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for certain. We couldn't afford to fail. We stepped out into the hall, the door slamming behind us, and the hotel seemed to close in around us once again, its walls whispering as though it knew what we were planning. But this time, we were ready. We had a plan, and we weren't going to stop until we destroyed the heart of this place, the library. The name itself felt like a promise, a key to understanding everything we had been through, everything we were up against. Jack's words had left a mark on me, the heart of the hotel. If we were going to stop it, we had to reach that place first. But the hotel had its own twisted way of hiding things. I could feel it, the oppressive weight of its strange and malevolent presence pressing in on us as we moved through the winding hallways. Each step felt deliberate. I wasn't sure whether I was walking towards something or away from something, but I knew that time was against us. The air seemed to thicken, every creak of the floorboards echoing like a warning. The temperature dropped, sending chills down my spine. We had no map of the hotel, no clue where this library could even be. The entire structure seemed to shift with every turn we took. The hotel wasn't just a building, it was a maze, a living, breathing entity that rearranged itself with every step, every thought. Jack kept walking with purpose, his jaw set, eyes scanning the darkened halls. He knew what we were up against, but he didn't let it show. He had been here longer than me, but even he had no idea where the library truly was. "We have to find the entrance," Jack said, his voice low but determined. "The heart of the hotel is hidden, but it's always there, waiting to be uncovered. We just need to get to it before it changes again." I nodded, but my stomach twisted. Every time I turned a corner, the walls seemed to shift. The dark wood paneling stretched, the ornate wallpaper bloated and writhed like it was alive. I could almost hear the walls whispering, murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. "Do you think the key is really in there?" I asked, trying to focus my mind, to ignore the sense of dread building in my chest. Jack gave me a quick glance, his face taut. "It has to be. The library is the heart of this place. If there's any place that can help us find the way forward, it's there." I could hear the uncertainty in his voice, even if he was trying to hide it. This was dangerous. We were trespassing in the very heart of the hotel's power, and every step we took felt like it was leading us deeper into its grip. But there was no turning back now. We had made our choice. As we turned yet another corner, I felt it. A sudden shift in the air. A pressure, like something was pulling at the very fabric of reality itself. The walls felt wrong. And then I saw it. A door. It was there, in the middle of the corridor, where there had been no door before. It wasn't like the other doors we'd passed. This one was old, worn, covered in thick layers of dust and grime, but it radiated something familiar, a sense of wrongness. It wasn't supposed to be here. I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing. "Jack!" He stopped too, turning slowly. He was staring at the door, his eyes narrowing. "That's it," he murmured, stepping forward. I felt a rush of relief flood through me, followed immediately by dread. Was this really the entrance to the library? Or was it another trap? It was too easy. The hotel didn't do things the easy way. Jack reached out, gripping the doorknob. The moment his hand touched it, the door shuddered, as though it was waking up. The temperature dropped even further, and I could hear the low hum of electricity in the air. The door creaked open with a groan that echoed through the hallway, and I hesitated. This was it. We had reached the threshold. Behind this door, we might find the answers we desperately needed, or we might find more darkness, more nightmares, waiting to swallow us whole. "Clara." Jack's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He was already stepping inside. "Are you coming?" I took a deep breath and followed him, stepping into the unknown. The moment we crossed the threshold, the atmosphere changed entirely. The air was dense with the scent of aged paper and leather. The walls were lined with bookshelves that stretched up into the darkness above, filled with books of every size and shape imaginable. But the most unsettling part wasn't the books. It was the quiet, the oppressive, suffocating silence that seemed to press down on us. I felt like I was standing in the belly of the hotel itself. The library felt like it was alive, its very essence pulsing through the air. The shelves groaned under the weight of the books, and the dim, flickering light from overhead seemed to cast long, distorted shadows across the room. Jack stepped further, into the room, his footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. "This is it," he whispered. "The heart of the hotel." I didn't know how he could say that with such certainty, but I didn't argue. Every instinct I had screamed that we were in the right place. But the question still hung heavy in the air. What now? "Where do we even begin?" I asked, looking around. The shelves were so vast that they seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Each one held a different world, a different secret, and I couldn't help but feel like the books were watching us. "There's a book," Jack said, his voice strained. "A book that holds the key to everything. It will tell us how to destroy the core of the hotel." I raised an eyebrow. "A book? How do you know that?" Jack's face hardened. "I've seen it. In my dreams. It's called The Chronicle of Time. It's the book that will explain everything. We need it." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in my chest. a book that held the power to undo everything, to destroy the hotel's core. But, where is it? I asked, glancing nervously at the shelves. Jack moved further into the room, his eyes scanning the rows of books. It's somewhere in here, somewhere in the center. We just have to find it. I nodded, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I couldn't shake the sense that the hotel was aware of our every movement, and that it didn't want us to succeed. The more I looked around the library, the more oppressive it felt. It was as though the walls themselves were alive, shifting and pulsating, watching us like a predator watches its prey. I could almost hear whispers, faint and far away, creeping into my mind. I turned to Jack. We have to be careful. This place doesn't feel right. He glanced back at me, his expression grim. I know, but we don't have a choice. We need that book. Together, we began to search the shelves, the weight of time pressing down on us as we moved deeper into the heart of the hotel. But the more we searched, the more I felt something stirring in the dark corners of the library. We weren't alone. The silence of the library was stifling, oppressive. Every step we took echoed in the vast room, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, watching, waiting. The air was thick with dust and the weight of countless secrets, some lost, others locked away in the pages of the books that lined every inch of the space. I could feel the hotel's pulse beneath my feet, a steady, suffocating rhythm that seemed to come from the very foundation of the building. I tried not to think about the whispers I had heard earlier. They had sounded like distant voices, like faint memories brushing against my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just the hotel playing tricks on me, but I wasn't so sure anymore. Jack was pacing now, his fingers running over the spines of the books, his face tight with frustration. "Where is it?" he muttered, more to himself than to me. "It has to be here." I stood off to the side, looking at the rows of books. The sheer volume of knowledge in this room was overwhelming. Every book, every page felt like a potential clue, a piece of the puzzle we had been trying to solve for days. But the question was, where was the Chronicle of Time? I had no idea where to start looking. The library stretched on forever, endless rows of ancient books, their leather covers cracked and worn. But none of them seemed to hold any answers, no hint, no sign of the elusive book we needed. "Jack, what if it's not here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my nerves were getting the best of me. "It has to be," Jack said again, his voice tight. "The hotel wouldn't have brought us here if it wasn't. We just need to find it." I didn't share his confidence. The air felt heavier now, the whispers growing louder. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was as if the hotel was alive and aware of every move we made. I turned to glance at Jack, who was still pacing, his eyes darting over the shelves. There was something almost desperate in his movements now, something frantic. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep calm. Maybe we should. And then, the ground beneath us shifted. The floor groaned, and for a second, I thought I was imagining it. But then, the entire room seemed to tremble, just slightly, like the building itself had shifted, as if the walls had sighed and exhaled a deep, unseen breath. My heart slammed into my chest, and I turned toward Jack, my pulse quickening. Jack froze, his gaze snapping to the back of the library. His expression went from frustration to something darker, something more knowing. He was waiting for this. "The hotel," he said quietly, his voice low and strained. "It's trying to stop us." I followed his gaze, my breath catching as I saw what he was looking at. At first, it was just a flicker, a shadow moving in the farthest corner of the room. But then the shadows grew darker, tangible, solid. I could see them now. Figures. Tall, spectral shapes that seemed to drift and writhe, their forms indistinct like shifting smoke. They were coming toward us. I felt my blood run cold. I knew exactly what they were. I had seen them before. The same dark, twisted forms that had haunted me since the moment I stepped foot in this place. They were the hotel's servants. Its guardians. "You have to keep moving," Jack said, his voice urgent. "The book is close. We're almost there." I didn't need to be told twice. My body reacted before my mind could fully process what was happening. I took off, following Jack as he led the way, weaving between the shelves, the sound of our footsteps mingling with the eerie whispers that echoed in the vastness of the library. Behind us, the dark figures followed, moving with unnatural speed. I could hear their low, guttural growls, like the sound of wind howling through cracks in a forgotten building. Their presence was suffocating, a cold that seemed to freeze the air itself. We ran, heartbeats pounding in unison, but no matter how fast we moved, the shadows seemed to grow closer. And then, suddenly, the shelves parted, just enough for us to squeeze through. And there it was, a pedestal. In the center of a cleared space, illuminated by a beam of light that seemed to come from nowhere, was a single book. It was perfectly placed, as though it had been waiting for us all along. Jack didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, his hands trembling as he reached for the book, pulling it from the pedestal with a swift motion. The moment he touched it, I felt a jolt, a thrum, that vibrated through the entire room. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were almost deafening. "No! You can't!" A voice, deep, resonant, angry, boomed through the library, the sound vibrating through my bones. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jack's hand tightened around the book, but even he seemed to feel the weight of the voice. He stumbled back, eyes wide, his body tense as the darkness swirled around us, trying to close in. "We need to go!" I shouted, grabbing Jack's arm and pulling him toward the entrance. The dark figures were closing in fast, their bodies melting into the shadows, becoming one with the walls, the very air. I could feel their malice pressing down on us, the temperature dropping even further, until I was sure my skin would freeze. But Jack wouldn't move. He was staring down at the book, his face pale, his breathing erratic. "Clara, I think it's working. I think this is the key." I glanced over my shoulder, seeing the figures growing more solid now, more real. Their forms were sharp, defined, and I could hear their low murmurs of rage, like thunder rolling in the distance. "We don't have time, Jack," I said, pulling at his sleeve. "We have to get out of here now." His grip tightened on the book, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't move. But then, the floor beneath us groaned again, louder this time, and Jack nodded, as though snapping out of a trance. He tucked the book under his arm, and we made a run for the door. The shadows chased us, their growls growing louder, and I could feel the very walls of the library shifting, trying to stop us, to keep us from escaping. We didn't look back. We ran through the door, slamming it shut behind us. The moment the door clicked into place, the room went deathly still. We were outside. The dark figures didn't follow us, but I could feel them lingering, pressing against the barrier between the library and the rest of the hotel. The hotel itself seemed to hold its breath. Jack leaned against the door, gasping for air. The book was still clutched tightly in his hands. I could see the relief in his eyes, but there was something else too, something I couldn't quite place. "What now?" I asked, my voice trembling. Jack met my gaze. His lips were tight, his eyes burning with the intensity of someone who had just seen the way forward. "Now," he said, his voice low. "We finish this." The door to the library had barely closed behind us when I felt it. The strange, sudden shift in the atmosphere. A stillness, almost unnatural, had settled over the hotel. The whispers had stopped. The darkness had receded, leaving only a heavy silence in its wake. I don't know what I expected after we found the book, The Chronicle of Time, but I thought we'd be different. I thought that, maybe, after finding it, we'd have some sense of control, some clarity on how to finish this, how to end the hotel's twisted grip on time itself. But I wasn't prepared for this. I turned to Jack. He was holding the book like it was a lifeline, his knuckles white against the old, worn cover. His face was pale, drawn, but there was something else there, something colder in his expression. It was the look of a man who knew the danger wasn't over, who knew that what we had found was only the beginning. Jack's eyes flickered to me, his brow furrowed in thought. "We need to leave," he said suddenly, his voice tight. "Get to the front desk, now." I blinked at him, unsure of what was happening. "What are you talking about? I thought we had the book. I thought this would..." It's not over. He cut me off sharply, his voice trembling with urgency. This hotel, it doesn't work like that. It can't be stopped just by finding one book. We have to destroy the core of it. Everything about it is tied to time. The hotel feeds off the cracks in time itself, and this, he held up the book, is what keeps it together. If we destroy it, we might have a chance to stop this once and for all. I swallowed, my mind racing to keep up with his words. Then what are we waiting for? Let's do it. Because, Jack continued, looking over his shoulder at the dark hallway behind us, something else has changed. The temperature dropped. I could feel the chill crawling down my spine, spreading through my limbs. The silence around us was becoming suffocating, like the calm before the storm. And then, I heard it. A faint scraping sound, followed by a low, guttural growl that echoed from somewhere deep within the hotel's bowels. I froze, my heart pounding, in my chest. The growl was too familiar. The sound of something not human. Jack's face went white. Not again, he whispered. I didn't need to ask what he meant. I knew. We had faced the hotel's servants before, those twisted shadows that had stalked us through the halls, but this was different. The sound was louder now. The growls were followed by a series of sharp, rapid footsteps. Something was running toward us. Jack, I whispered, my voice trembling. What the hell is that? He didn't answer, but I saw the look in his eyes. He had no idea either. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. I could almost feel the walls tremble with it, a vibration that made my teeth rattle. And then, out of nowhere, the hallway ahead of us exploded into chaos. A figure darted into view. A man, tall and ragged, wearing what could only be described as torn remnants of an old, blood-stained suit. His face was pale, gaunt, sickly. His eyes were completely white, like he had no pupils, no irises, just empty, milky voids. He wasn't alone. Behind him, a group of others, figures that looked just as decayed, just as twisted, appeared in the hallway. They moved toward us with terrifying speed, their faces contorted in expressions of pain and madness. I could hear them breathing, raspy and uneven, their steps too quick, too frantic to be natural. The man at the front grinned, his lips cracked and bloodied. "You thought you could escape?" His voice was hoarse, like it hadn't been used in years. "You can't. You belong to the hotel now." Before I could even react, one of them lunged toward us. I threw myself back, narrowly avoiding its outstretched hand as it swiped through the air. Jack cursed under his breath, raising the book in his hand like a weapon. "We need to get to the front desk," Jack shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me back. "Now, Clara, move!" I didn't argue. My body responded before my mind could fully catch up. We ran down the hallway, hearts pounding in our chests as the sound of footsteps behind us grew louder, closer. The hotel was alive again, more than ever, and it wasn't going to let us go that easily. We turned a corner and I saw it, the main staircase. It wasn't far now. We were so close. But as we approached, a loud crash echoed through the hotel. The floor beneath us shuddered, and the entire building seemed to groan in response, as if it had been struck by something massive. I lost my balance for a moment, stumbling against the banister, and then the door at the base of the stairs opened with a screech, revealing the first of the figures, the one with the dead, white eyes. It was standing in our way. It was fast. Too fast. I barely had time to react before it lunged toward me, but Jack was already there. With a roar, he swung the book in his hands, using it like a battering ram. The figure staggered back, its head snapping sideways with an unnatural crack. "Go!" Jack yelled, throwing the creature to the floor as it struggled to get back up. "Get out of here!" I didn't hesitate. I bolted down the stairs, almost tripping in my desperation to reach the front desk. I could hear Jack behind me, but the sounds of the creatures, those twisted things, growing louder with each second. I didn't know how long we had before. They caught up. Finally, I saw it. The lobby. The front desk. We rushed through the lobby, our footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The receptionist's desk stood as silent and unyielding as ever. But something was wrong. The lights overhead flickered, and the air felt wrong, heavy. And there, behind the desk, stood a new figure. The man was tall, dressed in black from head to toe. His face was obscured by a veil of shadows, his presence so cold that it felt like the very temperature in the room had dropped several degrees. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, his voice calm, smooth, and terrifying. "The hotel never lets its guests leave." The man behind the desk remained perfectly still, his figure swallowed by the shadows that seemed to dance around him, twisting and warping like they had a mind of their own. For a moment, all I could hear was the steady rhythm of my own breathing, harsh and uneven, as the weight of his presence pressed down on us. He didn't move, didn't speak again, just watched. I glanced at Jack, who was standing just a few feet behind me, his posture tense, his hand gripping the book tightly. The expression on his face was one I couldn't quite read, part terror, part recognition, as if this man, or whatever he was, wasn't entirely a surprise. Jack stepped forward slowly, and I could feel the temperature drop a few more degrees. My breath came out in a visible puff, a cloud of mist that dissipated almost immediately. "Who are you?" Jack asked, his voice steady but laced with an underlying fury. "What do you want?" The man behind the desk didn't immediately respond. Instead, his gaze flickered toward the book in Jack's hands, and for a moment, his expression softened. Not with kindness, but with something darker, more knowing. "I think you already know who I am," the man said finally, his voice a smooth whisper that sent a shiver crawling up my spine. "I've been waiting for you, Jack. For you and her." He turned his gaze toward me, and I could feel his eyes on me, even though I couldn't see his face. There was something about him, something I couldn't place, something I couldn't even understand. Jack's jaw clenched. You've been waiting for us?" The man nodded slowly. "Yes, it was inevitable, after all. The hotel has its ways, its paths, and I've been part of it longer than you can imagine." I opened my mouth to ask him what he meant, but Jack beat me to it. "Are you the one who started this? The one who caused all of this?" The man's lips curled into something like a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "In a way, yes. I've been here since the beginning, since the hotel was first built, and I am its keeper, its guardian, if you will." I couldn't contain the gasp that slipped from my mouth. Guardian? This man didn't look like someone who was protecting anything. "What do you mean, guardian?" Jack demanded, his voice rising. "The hotel's been manipulating time itself. People are dying. You're not protecting anyone, you're holding this place together." The man's eyes darkened, his lips curling into something more dangerous. "You don't understand. The hotel isn't just a building. It's an anchor, a vessel for the fabric of time itself. It exists in multiple planes, across multiple eras. It's a bridge, a link between them. The hotel is its own dimension." I took a step back. "A dimension?" Jack's voice had lost its earlier anger, replaced by a kind of weary disbelief. "But if this place is so important, why is it causing so much destruction? Why are people being trapped in loops? Why is time breaking here?" The man finally stood up from behind the desk, his movements fluid and unnatural. "Ah, that's where the problem lies. You see, there was a time when the hotel served its purpose, maintaining the balance of time across the ages. But that was long ago. The original purpose has been lost, forgotten. Over the years, the boundaries between the timelines have blurred, distorted." I could feel my stomach drop. The boundaries between timelines? Had I understood him correctly? Was the hotel some kind of bridge, not just between the hotel's different rooms, but across time itself? "Who did this?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper, the weight of the knowledge settling heavy in my chest. "Who broke it?" The man smiled again, though there was no humor in it. "Oh, I did, of course." I looked at him in disbelief. Jack's face twisted in confusion. "You?" "Yes," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "I was the one who caused the first crack, the first tear in time. Jack shook his head in utter disbelief. But why? What did you gain from this? You're just a prisoner here, aren't you? Just like everyone else. The man's gaze hardened, and he stepped toward us, his every movement filled with a kind of predatory grace. Prisoner? No. I am the keeper of time. I was once a great scientist, someone who sought to harness the power of time, to transcend it. But my ambition led me to make a mistake. He paused, his eyes flicking toward the floor, his fingers curling into tight fists. I sought to control time, to manipulate it. But the fabric of time is not a tool to be used. It's a force that cannot be contained. So you broke it, Jack spat. You tried to control time, and now the hotel's falling apart. The man's eyes darkened. Yes, and I failed. But in my failure, I became something else. A part of the hotel, a part of its consciousness. I stared at him, horror creeping up my spine. You are the hotel, aren't you? He didn't answer immediately, but the shadow of a smile tugged at his lips. In a sense. But more importantly, I am its curse. And now that the cracks have been made, the hotel is no longer stable. The damage is irreversible. You see, Jack, Clara, time is unraveling. I could feel it then. The air was thicker, the room pulsing with something ancient, something dark. You're saying this place is doomed, Jack said, his voice quiet. The man nodded. It was never meant to exist outside its boundaries, and now it's too late to fix. But that doesn't mean we can't control it. The hotel can be contained, its effects sealed. All we need is the right key. I felt a chill run through me. The key. The book Jack had carried with him all this time. What do you want from us? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man stepped closer, his form now looming over us, his eyes locked on Jack's. What I want is for you to finish what I started. You're the only ones who can stop this, you and the book you hold. A sudden realization hit me, and the words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. You want us to destroy the hotel? The man's lips curled into a wicked smile. Not destroy. Sever it. From time itself. And everything within. It will cease to exist. But if you fail, the hotel will spread its influence. It will spread throughout time. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, suffocating me. Jack was still staring at the man, his eyes wide, but I could see the determination slowly building in him. He raised the book, holding it up like it was a shield, his knuckles pale around its edges. Then let's finish it, he said, his voice as cold as the air around us. The man nodded. Good. Now, you understand the weight of your task. The room was deathly silent. The air in the lobby was suffocating. Every breath I took felt like I was inhaling something thick, heavy, and bitter. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the flickering lights above us cast long, twisting shadows stretching like fingers over the floor. I couldn't stop thinking about what the man had said, that we were the only ones who could stop this, that the hotel's very existence was now tied to time itself, unraveling in ways we couldn't even begin to understand. And now we were standing on the precipice, the weight of the decision pressing down on us. Jack was silent, his face tight with determination. He stood next to me, clutching the book like it was the only thing that kept him grounded. The man behind the desk, the keeper, as he called himself, had told us what needed to be done. But as the minutes passed, the truth settled deeper into my bones. This was not something we could walk away from. Whatever choice we made next would either end the nightmare or amplify it beyond recognition. The keeper's voice had been smooth, too calm, as he spoke of severing the hotel from time, of breaking the connection. But it all sounded too easy, too final. And that's when it hit me. Jack, I whispered, my voice shaky. What if it's a trick? What if he's lying? Jack didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the keeper, who had yet to move, his shadow still thickening around him, as if the darkness was a part of him, something he controlled. I've thought about that, Jack said quietly. But we don't have another choice. It's the only way. The hotel's power isn't something we can fight directly. It feeds on time, on everything we've seen. If we don't finish this, the consequences, they'll be worse than we can imagine. I nodded, though the fear gnawing at me wouldn't let go. How do we do this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though inside I was trembling. The keeper finally spoke, his words like ice cutting through the silence. You must perform the ritual, he said, his voice low and almost reverent. The ritual that was meant to seal the hotel's fate, to bind it to time itself. But it was never completed. I could never finish it. But you can. You and the book. You must use the book's power to sever the threads. How? Jack demanded, his voice now sharp, desperate. How do we do it? How do we make sure this is the end? The keeper's face twisted into something between a smile and a sneer. The ritual will call on the very core of the hotel, the heart that ties it to time. You must use the book's knowledge. Place it at the center of the hotel, where the boundary between time is weakest, and when you do, the threads of reality will begin to break. But it is dangerous. Once you begin, there is no turning back. I swallowed hard. I could feel the weight of what he was saying. There would be no coming back from this. No second chances. If we failed, the hotel's influence wouldn't just spread through the corridors. It would spread across time itself. Jack glanced at me, his expression unreadable. We have to, for all of us. I couldn't argue. Even if the keeper had his own motives, even if there was a chance that we were being led into a trap, I had no choice. The hotel was more than just a place now. It was a force, a broken link in time that needed to be sealed, or it would consume everything. We're ready, Jack said, his voice resolute. The keeper nodded, his eyes narrowing. Then go, perform, the ritual at the center. You will know it when you find it, and once you begin, there will be no stopping it.